This conference will now be recorded.
Please be sure to silence your phones and avoid using Wi-Fi here. We have 140 people that have signed up for the live stream, and if that happens, we want to be sure that we are able to broadcast to them. So thank you for taking care of your phone. I want to say thanks to WAER and the Newhouse School at Syracuse University for supporting the event with live stream camera operation and engineering work. So we really appreciate that. And for Chris's work to get it all organized and to serve as our moderator today. Chris Bolt is, as you all know, the News and Public Affairs Director at WAER. Greening USA, you know, is a 501c3 Central New York organization promoting sustainability and the 12 traits of a sustainable community. So if you're not familiar with it, pick up the card on the side table. The 12 traits embody everything from governmental leadership and sustainability to community engagement, and that's what we're here to do today. So other co-sponsors of this group, Dick Kornbluth of Central New York Solidarity Coalition will just talk a minute about his organization.
The Cny Solidarity Coalition is a volunteer-based, grassroots, not-for-profit community action organization that's open to any resident in Central New York. We were founded and formed shortly after the 2016 election. We stand with people of color, immigrants, the LGBTQI community, and all individuals and groups who are marginalized and targeted in our society. We have a mailing list of over 2,100 people who receive emails from us twice weekly about our events and other community events, and we meet twice a month. We support and partner with other organizations who share our values, including the Urban Jobs Task Force, the Syracuse Peace Council, and the Syracuse Immigrant and Refugee Defense Network. Sustainability for us means a community that, in addition to being carbon-free, provides an environment that is safe and healthy for all people to live, work, and play. Thank you.
Yes, welcome everyone. I'm Bob Haley on the board of Focus Greater Syracuse. We are pleased to be co-partnering with these other organizations, a significant effort to select our leadership for the future in these interesting and difficult and demanding times. We are pleased to have so many people in the room, from students from Newhouse as well as FM 88 and so on. It's a great resource. Focus looks to inform and engage the entire community to address questions, to make change for the betterment of all the people who live in the city. So we'll now turn it over to Chris Bolt from FM 88 and start this discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
All right. Welcome to our forum. How do you create a sustainable Syracuse? I have just a few opening remarks, and then we'll get to candidates and also some ground rules just to lay out to see how things are going to progress today. You're going to hear the word sustainable and sustainability a lot today. And as Greening USA and Cny Solidarity folks mentioned, we're not just covering environmental sustainability here. We're using the term in a broader sense to focus on financial and community initiatives and, you know, policy ideas that really make our city and our neighborhoods strive and thrive and work for everybody. You know, we all want a sustainable environment and, you know, responsible energy policies and clean air and clean water, but sustainability also means schools work, roads get paved, communities are good and places where people want to live. Businesses can survive and grow. All those things create a sustainable community as well. This approach comes from Greening USA's 12 traits of sustainable communities, and they do cover things such as economic base, land use and transportation planning, effective waste and energy policies, and other community building factors. Our candidates will have a chance to make opening statements, then we'll get to the questions that were provided by the organizing groups and by many of you who registered. You can also chime in after the fact as well. If you're in the atrium here attending the session live, you can put a comment on a card or something. Anastasia is over here and we'll take comments from you and give them to me after we get through the prepared questions, and there'll be time for that afterwards. If you're listening to the online live stream, you can do so in the chat function. So go to the chat function of the GoToMeeting, and we'll be monitoring those as well. And we'll get to as many of those as we can and try to consolidate like questions so that we can cover as many bases as we can. Our candidates sitting to my left, from farthest from me to closest to me, is Janet Berman. She is the Republican, Syracuse United, and Conservative candidate for mayor. Hi, Janet. Thanks for joining us. Mayor Ben Walsh is the incumbent mayor of the city of Syracuse and is an independent and Independence Party designated candidate. So Mayor Walsh, thanks for joining. And Khalid Bey right now is a Syracuse Common Councilor, and he is the Democratic nominee for mayor as well. We randomly selected order of opening statements, and Mayor Walsh, we're going to have you go first.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you to all the hosts of this event, Greening USA, Focus Greater Syracuse, Cny Solidarity Coalition, and all of you for being here today. I also want to recognize the Sierra Club. I'm proud to have the Sierra Club's endorsement this year, another great organization that we work so closely with. Sustainability is an imperative, and as we'll talk about tonight, it means a lot of different things, but I want to start with quite specifically the fact that we are in the midst of a climate crisis, and my administration over the past 4 years has worked with the urgency necessary to deal with this crisis. And I just want to give a few examples, more than a few, of things that we've done over the past 4 years that we believe has helped address this crisis that we're in. I'm very proud that New York State has designated Syracuse a clean energy community, and we can talk more about what that means, and also designated Syracuse as New York's flagship smart city. That was related to our work converting all of our streetlights to LED technology and a smart streetlight network. We also have retrofitted our city garages, our ice rinks, and our underpass lighting to LED technology. Altogether, with those projects, it's saving the city nearly, actually over $1.5 million and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by more than 5,000 tons every year. We also introduced a property assessed clean energy financing program, PACE, to the city. We partnered with other local leaders to lobby State Comptroller DiNapoli to divest the state pension fund from fossil fuel companies over the next decade, which he has agreed to do. I've signed on to the Back from the Brink campaign to prevent nuclear war. We've created a municipal sidewalk program and a micro-mobility bike share and scooter program. We have an urban forest master plan that we're advancing, and we're spending $2 million of federal pandemic relief funds to plant trees throughout the city. Finally, I agreed at the last Greening USA meeting to, I committed to updating the Syracuse Comprehensive Plan 2040, and specifically the sustainability plan. So as we talked about, there's a lot of other components to sustainability, but I wanted to start with the crisis that we're in, and I look forward to talking more about it. Thank you.
All right, second for opening statements, Janet Berman.
Thank you to the organizers and everyone here and those tuning in on Facebook. I'm going to take my opening statement as an opportunity to tell you a little bit about my background. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I grew up at a time of organized protesting in the 60s and 70s, and protesting not just war, but also on environmental issues. I marched in the first Earth Day ever and happened to be taking high school biology at the time. So my first undertaking related to Earth Day was organizing a letter writing campaign to push for banning of DDT. Later, I got involved in, of all things, slaughter of baby seals, which sadly still takes place. But I, did postcard writing campaigns to the Canadian government, and we staged some demonstrations near the Canadian embassy for that. While I was pondering my future in college, I had just completed a sociology major, and I was going to embark on a career in urban planning. But I was at a dinner with a woman who worked with my mother, and I talked about, she was Canadian, and I talked about my experience, trying to stop the slaughter of baby seals. And she was an economist, and she looked at me and she said, well, that's great, but what are those people who hunt and kill the baby seals going to do for a living? And it was an awakening for me. And so I decided instead that a lot of these problems have to be addressed in a wraparound way. And I completed a second major in economics. And from there went on to graduate school in economics at the School of Urban and Public Affairs at Carnegie Mellon University, which is now called the John Heinz School of Public Policy. As an economist, I am keenly aware of the disincentives to move in sustainable directions because of the costs. And so we've got to be very mindful of creating financial incentives for participants to take us in a more sustainable direction. And we see that taking place, but we also see the market shifting such that the forces are there, fortunately, to push us towards a more sustainable future. And just take, for example, the problem we're having right now with not having enough bus drivers. We don't have enough bus drivers for the school district. We don't have enough bus drivers for Centro. What can we do about that? Well, there are things we can do in the short run. As an economist, I say, well, you just got to pay them more. More people will be attracted to be bus drivers. But thinking long term, what we really want to do is create job opportunities so people can commute, and provide opportunities for low-income people if they choose to ride bicycles. Bicycles are not cheap. I don't know if any of you checked out lately what it costs for a bicycle. And then there's the maintenance and supplies for it. So I'd like to see us develop a collaborative effort to help underwrite the cost of bicycles for people who are less fortunate financially. We are looking to an area where, as far as school busing goes, if we provided the same kinds of opportunities to students across the city for our schools, so that there isn't a need to travel across the city to get quality education. That's another area that we can be pushed into. So, I just want to end my opening remarks with saying that as an economist, I understand we've got to set up the right structure so that we can, in fact, move forward on sustainable initiatives.
Thanks, Ms. Berman. And Khalid Bey.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning. First, apologies. I don't know how we got the mix up on time. My name is Khalid Bey, the Democratic candidate for mayor of the city of Syracuse. I think, as a legislator, on the subject of sustainability and particularly economics and marginalized communities, a lot of my work speaks to the very type of things that were alluded to early on in the introductions. I sponsored the ban-the-box legislation that allows for persons re-entering society to gain access to at least a preliminary interview for employment without being discriminated against based on their criminal background. I sponsored the warrants for inspection legislation. For years, tenants have been subject or at least disturbed by landlord abuses, neglect, houses exposed to the elements, code enforcement not being able to gain access to validate whether there were violations or not. And so I sponsored the warrants for inspection legislation that allows for code enforcement to gain access to these living spaces if they seek a warrant through the courts during work hours in an effort to provide recourse for citizens. I sponsored the disorderly property ordinance to rid our neighborhoods of gambling houses and drug houses, out of control corner stores in an effort to improve quality of life in and throughout our neighborhoods. And I sponsored similar legislation in an effort to empower people. The local hiring ordinance, every time there was a construction project, there was an effort by Urban Jobs Task Force and others to push for a community benefits agreement. And so I suggested that what we do is we take the principal ideas in the community benefits and we put it in a local law. And so I wrote the local hiring ordinance that is now a permanent part of our city contracts, along with Ban the Box, to ensure that people who live in our city gain access to employment. My campaign has been about three things primarily. One, improving the safety in our communities, quality of life, and ultimately not only for our safety, but also as a means toward improving our economic condition. Reduction of unemployment, providing real long-term sustainable jobs. While we know there's a lot of opportunity in construction, those jobs often end. Persons often still end up unemployed, searching for work. We've had training for years in our city where people will receive certifications and the like, but still no placement. And so to be able to provide long-term sustainable employment, job security for people is very important. Improving of our housing stock, obviously, to date, we've done a lot in the city. Credit to the entire City Hall for efforts on housing development. I've pushed, even prior to this administration, for the administration and for City Hall to be more responsible, and that we match our housing development with our speed of demolition. We were demolishing a lot. Southside in particular have seen demolition over the last 35 years that saw no construction to replace any of that demolition. South Salina Street corridor had no investment in over 35 years. And I've watched it, basically appear barren the entire time I lived in the area. And so these type of things has been very important to me. Neighborhood business corridor revitalization. These are the type of things that I understand we have to do. Last thing I'll say in that respect, my campaign is very simple. There's a lot of people who talk about being about the people, but absent the people, there is no government. So if the individual cannot provide for themselves and their family, if the neighborhoods are not walkable, if we don't have opportunities for entrepreneurship and the like, then I think we're failing as your representatives. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for your opening statements. Some of these ideas I'm sure will be covered as we get to different questions around some of these topics. I was going to start with questions on environmental sustainability. We ask candidates to keep answers to 1 minute. If there is some back and forth or answers to answers that we need to do, or certainly can be flexible to do that. Bob Haley down here in front has the 30-second and the 15-second card of the timekeeper czar, so take note of him. Excuse me. So let's start with a question about Syracuse and climate change. The question is, what actions do you think Syracuse should and could take to help mitigate and prepare for climate change, even though our area is arguably maybe not impacted as much as many others? And Mr. Bay, let's start with you.
I think number one is always the importance of educating and empowering not only people in government, because we are not the experts, but even our constituents on what's necessary to prepare for climate change. Certainly we're not as impacted. We're often number one in snowfall, number two in rainfall to Seattle. We have a lot of precipitation here, but the things that we can do as much as we can to improve air quality, things that we can do to reduce our carbon emissions and to prepare to make our city and our area, our air, our water, and the like, a lot more clean, a lot more sustainable. We've been on the path to doing that for a long time, even prior to, I think, some of us being elected. But we have to stay the course. We have to make sure we keep our plumbing and our water is very important. Our walkability is very important. I'm a person who walks all the time, believe it or not. And so I understand the importance of ensuring that our air quality is clean. As a person who suffers from respiratory issue and hay fever. Okay, Bob, I appreciate it. Appreciate it.
All right. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you. So I mentioned a few of our initiatives at the beginning that directly address that issue of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and addressing climate change, which is, again, at a crisis point right now. I do want to dig in a little bit more on transportation. So we in Syracuse are a highly dependent city on cars. And if we really want to address climate change, that's one of the key areas where we need to focus. I mentioned some of the ways in which we're doing that, developing a municipal sidewalk program that will make the city more accessible for pedestrians, building more bike infrastructure, more trail infrastructure like our Creek Walk extension, the Empire State Trail. But also as it relates to public transportation, that's a significant opportunity that we have here, and specifically the idea of introducing a bus rapid transit system in the city of Syracuse, something that we've been working on and are very anxious to move forward with. And it'd be remiss if I didn't mention, related to transportation, the opportunity we have with Interstate 81. I'm a passionate community grid supporter. I'm focused on getting that plan right, and I think those are all ways in which we can address climate change head on.
And Ms. Berman.
In addition to the globally responsible actions that we are taking now and want to expand upon, specifically within our community, I see opportunities to increase that. I'm glad Mayor mentioned transportation. This ties into several areas of the principles of sustainability. We have a large employer that kicked off in clay. We're also looking at a very large employer potentially for semiconductor chip production. One of the things we need to do is we need to get people in the city to those jobs. And I think the most effective way of doing that is to work with those companies in providing van pools, which is a time-honored method of commuting in very congested cities, where the company pays and sponsors the vans, and the employee designated to drive, picks up other people on their route, and it's safe and it's energy efficient.
Since we were talking about transportation, I'm just jumping ahead a little in my notes. I had a specific question about transportation that maybe we can dig slightly deeper into this. Transportation policy obviously has an impact on sustainability. Would any of you have plans to reduce the use of carbon-based fuels in city-owned vehicles? And are there things the city could do to reduce the broader community's dependence on gas and diesel cars and trucks? This question came actually from one of the groups, Cny Solidarity. Mayor Walsh, let's start with you.
Yes, so absolutely. We already have begun to address the issue through our city fleet. We actually created a new position in the city of Syracuse in the Department of Public Works, our fleet manager, who is managing our entire city fleet holistically for the first time in the history of city government, and through that looking for opportunities to create cleaner fleets. Actually, I mentioned our designation as a clean energy community, and part of that was our efforts related to our clean fleets operation. Beyond that, we are aggressively looking for more opportunities to install more charging stations throughout the city of Syracuse for electric vehicles. We know that that's where the auto industry is headed, and so we want to make sure that we have the necessary infrastructure in place to be a welcoming place for people with electric cars.
Ms. Fairbairn?
Before electric cars became a viable option for transportation, the first step in reducing emissions was in the development of cars that ran and buses that ran on compressed natural gas. When I was district administrator for the Workers' Compensation Board, we were given a car that ran on compressed natural gas. My district manager jokingly called it the Hindenburg, because he didn't really understand how it worked. But I embraced the opportunity to get one of those vehicles for our district, and I see that we need to remain open-minded about other options to do this type of energy conservation in transportation. But again, I also want to look at it from the other end, which leads us to true sustainability in the long term, is also reducing the need for transportation wherever possible. Having a reliable high-speed internet connection for everybody in the community will be one way we can help reduce commutes.
And Mr. Bay.
Absolutely, more pay stations for electric cars is one thing that I think we continue to promote. It's always exciting to see. I think for some people who know me, I'm a fan of development. I'm a fan of innovation. To see more electric pay stations come into play, I think is very important. But also convenience, neighborhood convenience, the increasing opportunity for walkability, the revitalizing of our neighborhood business corridors to reduce the need to travel. I use the South Salina Street corridor as an example, still a food desert in the Salina Street trade area, despite adjacent areas that have supermarkets. But in addition, I think there's other things we can do, the city being an example and a leader in that effort. The council has pushed for a long time to do exactly what the mayor mentioned, and that is to consolidate our fleet operation. We still talk about consolidating our facilities, but even our use or lack of use, or finding other ways to power our vehicles to reduce our gas emissions and the like, is very important. And I would certainly do my best to ensure that we move in that direction.
All right, thanks so much. One of the most basic needs we have in a community to keep the community going is air we can breathe and water that we can drink. I realize this is a super broad question for a 1-minute answer, but we're going to challenge you to do so. What should the city be doing to preserve clean water and air? Ms. Berman, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'm going to take half the question since I've got a minute and address the water situation. The moves to improve water quality in our community are important in terms of large-scale infrastructure investment, not only in the intake pipe in Skaneateles Lake, but also in replacing the aged piping that runs from there and throughout our city. But I also want us to focus on a sometimes overlooked source of lead poisoning, which are the lead supply lines that go from the city water systems into the homes. And I was very pleased that President Biden recognized this as a serious problem and a priority for providing federal funding to replace those lines.
Mr. Bay?
Yes, obviously we have aging infrastructure in terms of our plumbing, and there's a lot of effort to the credit of City Hall right now to change that and improve that. It would be my effort to continue in that direction. But I think we also have to take responsibility and be honest about what has been a problem for years. We inherited, a lot of the industrialized racism that we experience in neighborhoods like mine, where communities are communities of color, marginalized communities, are living near spaces like viaducts. I have a respiratory issue as a result of living in close proximity to that viaduct. I'm one of those children who grew up with that issue. But also, the other areas around the city, we've duplicated this problem, and anything that we can do to remove neighborhoods or to build neighborhoods and revitalize neighborhoods at greater distances from those type of areas, I think is one thing we can do to ensure cleaner air for the citizens. Thank you.
And Mayor Walsh.
Thank you. I'm going to also focus on water. We have an incredible asset in Skaneateles Lake that provides fresh drinking water, not just to the city, but to some other surrounding municipalities. And I take our role as a steward of that asset very seriously. We are investing significantly in our water infrastructure, both with city funds, but also with recently received federal ARPA funds. One of the investments that we're making is in the extension of the intake pipe into Skaneateles Lake, one of the intake pipes. By extending it farther out and deeper, it decreases the risk of turbidity that comes with volatile weather, high winds, as well as the threat of harmful algae blooms. Related to that, the city also invests nearly $1 million every year into the watershed around Skaneateles Lake. That can't be overlooked, and we're continuing to focus on that investment and to address new threats, especially as it relates to harmful algae blooms. Relative to construction, we are doing as many dig once projects as possible so we can improve our water pipes while we're doing our road reconstruction. And as everyone is painfully aware here downtown, we're doing a lot more dig once, which does take a little bit longer, but certainly extends the life of our utilities. And finally, we work very closely with Onondaga County to continue the Save the Rain program, which we're very proud of as well. Thank you.
And Ms. Berman, did you get, oh, you started on this one, so, okay. Moving along, and
I'll take it again and do the air.
Go to the air, yeah. Maybe we'll put that on later. I realize that was a pretty ambitious ask for that, so thank you for rolling with it. Khalid Bey, Democratic candidate, you mentioned environmental racism, and I wanted to just ask a question specifically about this. To what extent does Syracuse have environmental racism, and if so, what can be done to combat it? And we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, again, I always talk about what we often inherited, and, we become responsible if we remain negligent, right? And we understand For example, near the viaduct, and the people who live in that proximity has the greatest cases of respiratory issues in Onondaga County. And for that reason alone, there should be an effort to certainly remove the viaduct and ensure that we have greater and cleaner air. You have the Blueprint 15 that is taking place, and so proximity should be considered in terms of people who live there as well. But when we, as we bring in more, or we seek to bring in more business and more technology, it's about where we place and allow for those things to exist. Rezone will be very important in that respect. Obviously, land use is very important when we're talking about ensuring sustainability, equitable distribution, if you will, or equitable inclusion of everything from green spaces to walkable spaces, living spaces, and the like. And so we have to be very responsible economically and, of course, environmentally when we're executing something that's very important and game-changing like rezone.
Mayor Walsh.
There is no greater example of environmental racism in the city of Syracuse than the elevated viaduct that is 81. And that is why I'm so passionately advocating for and look forward to working on removing the elevated viaduct in favor of the community grid. Related to that is the issue of redlining, which when you look at what neighborhoods were redlined, there's a reason why neighborhoods that were proximate to that elevated viaduct with higher air quality issues were located there. And so there's a direct correlation between our housing policies, historic housing policies, transportation policies, and the legacy of that environmental racism lives with us today, and is why it's so incumbent that with this 81 opportunity, with the opportunity to work with Syracuse Housing Authority to redevelop their neighborhoods, we need to do it in a way that is truly inclusive, that benefits first and foremost those that live there right now. And one more example I just wanted to point to is the sewage treatment plant over on Midland. And that's much more recent environmental racist history that we need to reckon with and make sure, again, through Save the Rain and other improvements, that we never make those mistakes again.
Ms. Berman.
I think it would be a mistake to say that we're solving the problem of environmental racism by taking down the viaduct. What's going to happen after the viaduct is there will still be a very busy, highly traveled corridor there. So in order to reconcile the problem that resulted in environmental racism by the construction of the viaduct, we need to assist people in living somewhere other than right next to that continued high travel area that's going to exist. We know that cars operate more efficiently when they're moving consistently at higher speeds. When there's stop and go traffic, there's a lot more emissions per vehicle. Now we will be reducing the number of vehicles, but we're going to increase the output per vehicle of cars traveling along the community grid. So I think it's imperative that we provide housing for those people who have been along that route in an improved area of the city. Thank you.
Just sticking with environmental racism a moment, each of you outlined things that are problems. What is a policy, maybe just a quick answer, what's a policy you could adopt as mayor or champion as mayor that would, rather than just increase our attention to it or our awareness of environmental racism, really prevent the next mistake that, as you mentioned, we inherited these things. How do we make sure in a policy way as mayor that you could do something so that doesn't happen again?
This is where, and I'll include, besides air quality, I'll include our opportunity economically and otherwise. This is where, as I stated, rezone becomes very important. Where we allow things to exist, the cost for those things that we would allow to be developed. Blueprint 15, I text the mayor early on when that conversation started, and my message to him was, this cannot be another 15th ward. It could not be another 1839 Harrison Street that led to population in the 15th ward. And so when we talk about ensuring that people have the right to live in the neighborhoods that they were born in, it goes back to what I mentioned a second ago, that we have to give consideration to where we are allowing people to live, but more importantly, where we allow for the businesses that we would attract to develop There are disturbances to those respective neighborhoods, whether they change them from low density to medium to high. All of these things have to come into play. We're a people first operation, and we have to make sure that the people and their living spaces are secure.
So zoning is a key element to make sure that those things don't happen again.
Absolutely.
Mayor Walsh?
A rezone will either be exceptional or it'll be horrible.
So I'm going to pick up right where the councilor left off. I think we are very much in agreement in the fact that the Blueprint 15 initiative, and frankly, all of our new housing initiatives cannot make the mistakes of the past, and we need to learn from them. And what we've learned is concentrating any type of housing, whether it's low-income housing or luxury housing in one place, doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And so we need to incentivize mixed income housing, which is what we've been doing with the local and state and federal resources that we have to invest into housing. So we need to accomplish it through housing policy and maximize the amount of mixed income housing. We do need to do it through zoning, and we have an opportunity with rezone that I look forward to working with Councilor Bay and his colleagues on reintroducing by the end of this year. And also something the councilor mentioned, business districts, bringing businesses to the neighborhoods so people have accessible job opportunities that they can walk to. There's no more exciting example right now than what's going up on the south side in JMA Wireless, which is building, it's high tech, but it's manufacturing in an old industrial part of our city where people will be able to walk to work and access living wage jobs. So we know what works. We're doing it a little bit. We need to do it a whole lot more.
Ms. Berman, you mentioned actually a policy idea of helping people move away from environmental hazards. Do you have another suggestion of, as mayor, what you could do to combat environmental racism?
Well, you know, we have a forum in which these concerns could be addressed, and that is TNT, Tomorrow's Neighborhoods Today. Unfortunately, we don't have the kind of citizen participation that would reflect people's concerns throughout the community in what kind of development is taking place and how we were improving the housing situation. I've attended a lot of these meetings since going back to its inception, and there's a small group of very concerned, admirable individuals who care about their community, who participate in those meetings, but it's a small group and it's not really representative of the neighborhood. So one of the things I'd like to see is solve that problem, figure out how we can engage more people in the community to be involved, to come to these meetings and discuss what we're planning in an area.
All right, I'm going to move on to financial sustainability questions, just so we can keep things rolling along. And let me start by saying, let's look at the problem side of the equation just a minute. What would you say are the biggest barriers to a sustainable economy and sustainable employment in our area? And let's start with you, Mayor Ben Walsh.
Thanks, Chris. Labor is the critical issue right now. And while it is a significant impediment to further economic growth right now, it's also an incredible opportunity. When we launched our Syracuse Surge initiative, the purpose of that was to be our strategy for inclusive growth in the new economy. That means making sure that we are attracting businesses that bring with them accessible living wage jobs, but also training our local workforce for the jobs that are going to be available and are available in the new economy. That's why we're investing so much in our high schools, in our career and technical education programs. That's why we're proposing to build a new STEAM high school. That's why we're investing in the Cny Educational Opportunity Center and their workforce development initiatives. And that's why we've also invested in the Syracuse Build Pathways to Apprenticeship program, where we're specifically targeting marginalized populations, particularly communities of color, women, and veterans. We're bringing them in for job training with the trades unions actually doing the curriculum and the training, and people that come through that program, we've had 20 graduate, we have 20 going in right now, will be automatically accepted into an apprenticeship of their choice. So we have to connect the people that are looking for opportunity with the opportunities that exist, and we're doing that.
Ms. Berman?
This is where being an economist can frame a problem. When you talk about financial sustainability, we can look at it from two sides. There's the financial sustainability of our city government, and our being able to provide the services to our citizens that are necessary and equitably distributed. Then there's the financial sustainability of our citizens, that they are able to get living wage jobs, that they have careers that they can look forward to, and they have the education to prepare them for that. I think a lot has been undertaken historically, and this is not a criticism of what our administration is doing now, but over the decades, the work readiness programs have not been as effective as we would like to see. So I think we need to go beyond the schools and go beyond what we have taking place for adult education opportunities right now. And we have to attract the people who aren't work ready into taking advantage of those resources. And I think that has to be done on a micro level. I think we have to have people in the community, volunteering in the community, going out from our religious institutions, going out from our community organizations, and actually talking to people in the community and engaging them one-on-one in a conversation about what the options are.
And Mr. Bay, biggest barriers to sustainable economy and employment?
Number of barriers. One, many in communities like mine would argue that a version of redlining still exists. But I will go back to, again, rezone. Effectively mapping out our land use to ensure that we're making the greatest use, or taking making the greatest opportunity with how we use land and creating revenue opportunity, understanding that your taxes, your property taxes, is the second greatest revenue generator, especially for municipal government. In addition, improve efficiencies in city government. We have a lot of redundancy. We have a lot of leakages. We have a lot of services that we can consolidate within government to improve our efficiency, not only in services, but also in savings. But when we're talking about jobs, we have an understandable focus on the future, but that can't be at the expense of the moment. There are unemployed, able-bodied adults now who are required to take care of their children, but they don't have work opportunity, and they may have a skill set for some of the jobs that we're talking about now. Entry-level employment, I argue, is the greatest gateway toward long-term employment, especially considering that most people now with employment are paying at least $15 an hour. That's $31,000 a year in a city where the average, usually the median income is about $35,000. So it's very important to understand that logic and the need for people to work and be able to pay their rent, pay their mortgages today, not tomorrow.
Great. Ms. Berman, you started to talk about a little bit about the city's sustainability in terms of providing services and having revenue, et cetera. This question was actually submitted by one of the sponsoring groups, Focus Greater Syracuse. What kind of long-term budget or spending or revenue plans would be needed to ensure that kind of fiscal stability?
Well, the first thing, as Councilor Bay pointed out, the opportunities to continually improve efficiencies in what we're doing now with consolidation of functions across departments is certainly something that should be looked at. I think we also have to be creative about going outside, especially in the short run, what revenue sources are available out there. I think we should consider taking on sponsors, corporate sponsors for some of our parks and green spaces. This is something that's done in a lot of cities throughout the country, and it can be done effectively without slapping a logo on every trash can in the park. There are corporate foundations that are looking for effective ways to impact communities, and that's certainly one area. The other thing is, programs, job training, construction trades, the work we do there, going to corporations like Home Depot and collaborating with them to provide more revenue streams into the areas where we want to improve our quality of life.
Great, Mr. Bay.
Thank you. Always number one on my list is going to be neighborhood revitalization. We have a lot of underperforming residential properties, not to mention commercial properties. But to be able to direct, guide funding toward neighborhood revitalization would not only improve our ability, in terms of tax generation, our ability for our local contribution to our schools, but equally allow families an opportunity toward developing generational wealth. Long-term has a great benefit. In addition, infrastructure, oftentimes by some experts is considered a black hole. You'll always have to pay for it. You'll always be spending on it. And the equity, some argue it's not enough. There needs to be a jobs training component connected to infrastructure. And whether we get the state and the Fed to buy into the logic, there's always the effort to try to make the cities more sustainable. We need their help and their support to allow us to put those kind of jobs into place. Lastly, it's very important from my perspective that we take better care of our senior and disabled. We can't make so many changes in our society without giving consideration that many live on a fixed income, and while the market changes, their income won't. So how do we create and put safeguards in place to ensure that they can continue to pay their rent, their mortgage, their utility, and not make them homeless and be dealing with another vacant structure in the near future?
Mayor Walsh, ideas for either spending or revenue that can increase fiscal sustainability?
So 4 years ago, when I first ran for mayor, one of the topics that dominated the election was the fiscal solvency of the city of Syracuse. There were real conversations happening about whether or not the city would become insolvent and go bankrupt. You don't hear those conversations anymore, and that's not by accident. That's because we've worked incredibly hard over 4 years to stabilize the city's finances. For the first time in the history of city finances, last year's audit showed no material weaknesses in city finances. Our bond rating agencies have increased our economic outlook and maintained our ratings stable. And while we have been struggling with a structural deficit for many years, we were slowly but surely closing that deficit. Then, of course, the pandemic hit. That certainly dealt us a blow, but we were able to manage our way through that. And now, thanks to the federal relief that we are well on our way again to a balanced budget. I just want to also touch on a new city service that we introduced as it relates to personal fiscal empowerment, and that's our Financial Empowerment Center. That's a city service that we introduced that any city resident can take advantage of right now. It's been in place for a few years. We've reduced debt by more than $2 million and increased savings by more than $1 million for the 800 individuals that have benefited from those services. So you have to address finances both at home and at City Hall, and again, we're doing both.
Great. Ms. Berman, did we start with you on this one? I'm sorry, I'm looking at other questions, so my bad on there. Okay. And another question regarding financial stability, and again, some of you touched upon this, but is there a good idea, maybe one good idea that can stimulate growth in some of the failing or struggling business areas, given that in downtown, there's certain areas that have done well and strived, pandemic maybe notwithstanding, but those even are the areas that have recovered quicker. Is there a policy idea or initiative that could help some of the other struggling areas, neighborhood little business centers, that could improve those areas, those business districts, and by extension, those neighborhoods? Let's start with you, Mr. Bay.
Absolutely. I think government should play a major part in the support of creative culture, the support of businesses, and obviously the attraction of business to our neighborhood business corridors. I don't think we've been as aggressive as we should have in attracting businesses to the corridors, but key here is the education to would-be entrepreneurs on what the market would support. Most businesses come into play and go out, within 6 months to a year because they're providing a product that the market does not support. To the credit of this administration, I worked with the business development, to put in a request to those guys, and they delivered. Another report since Metro Edge was done in 2005. We've done another report fairly recently on the economic demands on our neighborhood business corridors and what those neighborhood business corridors would support and what would be sustainable. I think that's very important when you talk about improving, economic condition and opportunity for entrepreneurs and for business. Just being purposefully redundant here, and understanding of what those markets would support is key. Some of those Metro Edge numbers I still know off the top of my head, and the mayor will tell you I've been still making the same argument, that we failed to invest in South Salina Street as an example, to really bring that neighborhood back and duplicate similar type of services or efforts, on our other neighborhood business corridors throughout the city.
Mayor Walsh.
Yeah, so you can't do neighborhood development separate and apart from business development. That's why we have the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development. And that's why we launched our Resurgent Neighborhoods initiative. So we could take a comprehensive approach to neighborhood revitalization by targeting specific neighborhood business districts, investing in those districts, inventorying properties, trying to connect with prospective businesses and entrepreneurs, and also investing in the neighborhoods around them. When you talk about the stability of neighborhoods, look no further than the statistic that approximately 25% of our city population, a quarter of our city population, moves at least one time per year. Think about how disruptive that is, especially if you're living in poverty. Think about how difficult it makes it for those neighborhoods to be stabilized, for those people's lives to be stabilized, getting to work and getting to school if they're regularly moving around throughout the city. That's why we're making an unprecedented investment in housing in our city, building 50 new single-family owner-occupied affordable homes, 75 units of affordable rental housing. That's why we are doing neighborhood and business development together so we can truly stabilize our communities. Thank you.
And Ms. Berman, an idea to stimulate growth in struggling business areas?
I would start with the businesses that are there right now. In the short run, so many businesses in our community are still reeling from the effects of COVID, loss of customer base during lockdowns, and their loss of revenue streams that sustained them in the past. So my efforts would be focused initially, that the city government efforts, I think, should be focused initially on existing businesses and working with them to see if there are opportunities to grow their businesses and expand their areas, and what they need to do, what kind of support they need in order to continue their presence in these specific neighborhood business strips.
Some areas have smart growth policies designed to help economic and neighborhood growth while also doing it in as sensitive a way as possible for the environment. Should the city, and maybe the city and the county together, have coordinated policy around smart growth that would guide such sustainable growth? Mayor Walsh, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. And you said it right, Chris. It needs to be the city and the county, because if we're doing it separate and apart from each other, it's not going to work. And that's essentially what's happened throughout the history of this community. Developing housing and new businesses in the city is inherently smart growth because you have existing infrastructure there. But for far too long, our community, and particularly out in the county, we've allowed for sprawl as our population up until recently has not grown. So we need to work more closely together with our surrounding municipalities, make sure that we're not competing against each other for business or for housing. But absolutely, we need to do more. We do have an opportunity with rezone, again, to make sure that we are growing in a smart way, because again, we are growing for the first time in 70 years per the latest census. So we have an opportunity to go back into the neighborhoods, including, as Councilor Bay mentioned, down on the south side, where we have seen so many blocks decimated, and rebuild our housing, which is again what we're doing right now through our infill strategy with Resurgent Neighborhoods initiative. As our population continues to grow and as business opportunities grow, we need to double down on those investments and make sure that we have our partners in the county in lockstep with us so we can truly grow in a smart way for the first time in a long time.
Ms. Berman?
I mentioned earlier the business development that has taken place in the town of Clay, and there are going to be certain types of economic development that necessarily will occur outside of the city. The proposed semiconductor chip manufacturing site, there isn't the kind of acreage needed for that available within the city. So that's why our county executive has worked so hard to consolidate that land in order to make that available for chip production. But we have to, in the process of doing this, make sure that that's an opportunity for city residents getting employment. And that is something, again, going back to the idea of the van pools, that is something that we should be talking to whatever company is looking to come in there with their manufacturing facility. That like I said, there's a clear demonstration of this as a policy that works when you look at the city of Houston. And that's the kind of thing that in smart growth that we have to incorporate into the discussions from the start.
And Mr. Bay, smart growth policy?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously it's necessary to work with our partner in the county, but smart growth is essentially what we've been talking about, neighborhood revitalization, clean neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods, neighborhood business quarter revitalization. This is the effort that we've been working on to date, again, to credit the work we've done in City Hall. But certainly there's a lot more we can do. I'll go right back to the need to understand what the market would support. When you look at our neighborhood business corridors, whether you're talking about underperforming or underperformance on Geddes or on Salina or on the bottom of Fayette, the middle of Fayette rather, parts of Butternut, this is where we're lacking. The understanding of what the market will support, what people will spend their money on, the type of businesses that could exist here, is key. Also, I think we would be remiss to, and I'm not making the suggestion that it's happened, but it hasn't been a discussion in a while. We got to revisit the discussion on creative culture versus service culture. We're still trapped in a service culture where we're not producing anything. And so it's very hard to produce any real revenue and create any real wealth, in and throughout our city. A lot of our neighborhood business corridors are occupied by services and not creative opportunity or entrepreneurs. And so we can give consideration in that respect. Obviously, smart growth is something that we have to continue to work on and learn a lot more, obviously, but ultimately be very purposeful and deliberate in our efforts to execute.
All right, Janet Berman, Republican candidate and conservative candidate. Let's start with you on this one. Way back in 2007, Mayor Matt Driscoll had the Go Green initiative for Syracuse, which brought us some attention around green issues. Would it be important for Syracuse to be known as a sustainable community? And would something like an Office of Sustainability or a coordinator make sense to push such an idea?
It would certainly be advantageous to us to be recognized nationally as a model city for green initiatives. However, creating another department isn't the way to do it, in my opinion. What we've been talking about in these issues of sustainability is it needs to be organically part of every function of city government. We've talked about introducing these concepts into how we do business every day. So merely creating another department, another bureaucracy, I think would be a mistake.
Great. Mr. Bay?
I think at the least you have to create a facilitator or establish a facilitator or a group of facilitators who will work with the experts to achieve your goals. As it relates to the effort that former Mayor Driscoll made, I think there's a number of things that we can do to become, that green city. I've pitched the idea for years that at times got some chuckles and at other times made some eyes widen. I believe that we've allowed or haven't taken a great enough advantage of the precipitation we have here in the city. I reiterate the fact that we're often number one for snowfall, number two for rainfall. I pitched the idea for the past 10 years about figuring out ways, and this was in conjunction with work with Professor Charlie Driscoll, Syracuse University, to collect, melt, and filter snow and to revisit the idea of steam generation. Syracuse University has demonstrated their expertise with the IBM data center, cutting their energy uses for computers by 50%. The city can duplicate a similar process, particularly for municipal buildings, and cutting our energy and ultimately saving our energy usage and saving our taxpayers a lot of money. I think, and I make the argument, I made the argument to Dave Knapp and others some years ago that I think the trolley lot is the perfect place for such a facility where snow can be delivered and filtered, and we can keep our sidewalks clean, and we can find a new way to save on energy costs and the like. So me and the mayor talked about this a few times early on, but I believe that's something we have to give serious consideration to.
And Mayor Walsh, should we be a sustainable community and or have a sustainability coordinator or office?
So we do. I'm pleased to say we have a great colleague here in city government, Rebecca Klosner, who I know many of you know, who's worked on so many of our sustainability initiatives as part of our planning office, which is part of the Syracuse Onondaga County Planning Agency. Again, making sure that we're doing this work collaboratively with the county. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the posters in the back, which actually do date back to the Driscoll administration. The reason we haven't taken them down is because we're in the process of selling this building so we can put it into a higher and better use. But I think that there were certainly good things that happened during those efforts. But I think that it's important that we be authentic with any effort to be competitive in particular industries. And we have some great stories to tell when it comes to sustainability. Look no further than Onondaga Lake and the cleanup that's taken place. We're not where we need to be yet, but I think as long as we continue to do the work that we're doing with our existing sustainability coordinator and all the projects that we mentioned, and look at where we can leverage the progress and the investments that we've made, we can build upon what we've accomplished and hopefully authentically and organically be a destination and a showcase for sustainability.
Last question on community sustainability, which, as many of these do, bleeds over into the other areas. Are there infrastructure investments that Syracuse could make that would really improve life, improve mobility, make the city more efficient and attractive to visitors and anyone who might want to relocate here? Do you have an idea of maybe one or two infrastructure investments that we could make? And Khalid Bey, we'll start with you.
I'll start with municipal broadband. I don't think, I think it's one of the most attractive investments we can make. It's been a discussion for years, again, even before this administration. And I credit this administration for being willing to invest $5 million for a pilot. I tried to push the mayor to invest $20 million based on what JMA communicated to me the cost would be to build it out. But in an effort to become, a city of connectivity and the like, to me, it's a worthwhile investment. You're talking about cutting, reducing costs for people. I talked to JMA specifically. Is it practical to charge a $50 flat rate for 5G or municipal broadband citywide for people? They said yes. 20 million was the cost. They said it would be to build it out and ensure that people had access. So I think that's one thing that would be obviously beneficial for business in every household, especially considering the circumstances we just experienced during the pandemic, with no guarantee that we won't be back there, in the future, hopefully not. But that's something that we certainly have to make an investment in.
Mayor Walsh, infrastructure idea that would really pay off?
Yeah, I totally agree with Councilor Bey on broadband, and that's something that we have set aside federal funding for and are in the process of pursuing. I'm going to also point out another opportunity that we have with waste management. I talked about Onondaga Lake, and one of the challenges that we have with Onondaga Lake is the amount of floatables that end up in the lake, and that's because the way in which we collect trash in the city is inherently unsustainable and inefficient. That's why we set aside some of our federal relief funds to purchase carts for every city resident, recycling and trash carts. So we can have a uniform way in which people put out and bring in their trash with lids, so you don't have trash strewing out all over our city streets. We think we're also going to affix arms to our existing trash trucks. So like you see in some of the suburban communities, those arms can pick up the cans, put them in. I think that will make a significant difference aesthetically in our city, environmentally. And when combined with some of our other recent initiatives, our Adopt a Block program, where we have over 100 groups throughout the city adopting blocks and picking up litter, we are in the process of, and I think with that additional investment, making a significant improvement to quality of life.
And Ms. Berman, good infrastructure investment?
I think both broadband and waste management efforts in that investment will be progress. But I want to go back to, so I have nothing new to add there. So I want to take my time to go back to the what the city of Syracuse can be known as nationally. And frankly, we have to get rid of the reputation that we currently have as the city with the highest concentration of poverty among Blacks and Hispanics in the nation. And over the course of time, since the Atlantic Monthly first published the article detailing this problem, the number of census tracts where this occurs has grown by 24%. So, that is an area where we are not making sufficient investment and not smart enough action.
All right, great. Thanks so much. I'd like to now turn to some questions that were submitted by audience members, either here at the City Hall Commons Atrium, as well as some that were submitted online through the live stream. This one regards undocumented immigrants and other refugee immigrants that have come to our community. The pandemic exacerbated maybe some of the problems that those communities face, but also some of the benefits that they might provide. Do you agree that local government should work to support undocumented workers and their families, as well as refugees, in finding employment, legal services, et cetera, given that, according to this person who wrote this question, that they do offer support to the community in different ways? I think Mayor Walsh, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. As mayor now, I am the mayor of everyone in this community, regardless of your immigration status. Let's be honest. The federal immigration program is completely and fundamentally broken. So that needs to be fixed. But in the meantime, if you live in the city of Syracuse and you're law-abiding and doing the right things, then you are welcome here. And we have long been a refugee resettlement community. Of course, there used to be a sign up in front of City Hall that said Syracuse bids you welcome. I relish the role as a welcoming community, again, particularly as it relates to refugee resettlement. That when you talk about our population increase, years past when we weren't increasing population, the only reason it was stabilized is because we were a refugee resettlement community. And it's reflected in our neighborhoods, it's reflected in our business districts. Our new Americans are such an asset, and it's a win-win. It gives us an opportunity to help our fellow humans. And that's something that I welcome. I was proud to pen a letter with the county executive and our legislative leaders to President Biden welcoming Afghani refugees here to the city of Syracuse. We have begun to welcome them. And again, as long as I'm mayor, we will be a welcoming city for all.
Ms. Berman?
Our new Americans are a valuable resource in our community, bringing their perspectives and their culture with them. However, we're not meeting their needs, nor are we meeting the needs of old Americans in the city of Syracuse with regards to housing. There have been numerous articles over the years about the terrible conditions in the apartments where we house our new Americans and where existing citizens of Syracuse have been living. I don't think we are doing nearly enough to address this, and I don't think it's building new houses. I don't think the city government should be in the business of home building. City government should be in the business of facilitating people to improve their conditions, improve their homes, and make them safe and healthy.
All right, thanks. Mr. Bay, ideas about helping undocumented immigrants and refugees as they can help our city?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, we can't be hypocritical. We live in a society that is peopled by many of us whose ancestors may not have originated here. And from my perspective, every new culture we invite or we accept adds to the dynamic of our character. In terms of things we've inherited, we've inherited, for example, segregated neighborhoods that many people talk about. But in the spirit of turning lemons to lemonade, there's equally a value to be seen with the preservation of culture and the dynamic that it adds to the character of our city. I think it makes it marketable. I think it makes it appealing. If I want to experience a little bit of Ireland, I know I can go to Tip Hill. If I want to experience a little bit of Italy, I can go to North Salina Street and places north. There's value there when you attract new cultures and lend support for new cultures, giving them opportunities to sustain their families while simultaneously assisting them in their efforts to become legal citizens here in America. This is what our country is about. And obviously, absent that very idea, I'm not sure if it's the same America many of us are accustomed to.
Question about energy use. Buildings use a lot of energy. This actually came from a member of the live stream audience. Buildings use a lot of energy. How would you propose to encourage adherence to a LEED or other kind of standard that might make buildings more efficient, or maybe even to assist retrofitting? Ms. Berman, start with you.
Sure, this builds right on what I was talking about with regards to housing in our city. I think government needs to support the green and healthy housing initiatives. And we can do so with making grants available for home improvements, retrofitting, changing out of windows, installing more efficient heating systems. And I think that is an investment in our community that has a much higher payoff than building a single family home at the cost of $364,000 and selling it to the lucky person who gets to pay $100,000 or more less than what it costs to build.
Mr. Bay?
Yes, obviously all of the new construction we're doing in terms of housing is energy efficient. The rehabs that are happening with housing is energy efficient. Retrofitting is very important. In addition, though, I'll go back to education. As a counselor over the years, I would put on these home energy savings workshops. And the purpose of these workshops was to educate people on the many ways that they could save on energy usage. I'll give an example. Last January, pre-pandemic, my utility bill was $100. The January before, it was $82 for a number of reasons. One, I unplug everything except the refrigerator and the stove. Second, I control my flushing. Most people don't know that their tanks are leaking into their toilet bowl. Thanks to the water department, they educated me on that. And so there's many ways we can educate and empower people. I've done these workshops around my council district as the 4th District Councilor numerous times to help people figure out ways to save money in their houses. And it makes us a lot more responsible, a lot more energy conscious. And these are just some of the things that I think we can do. But in terms of our housing and our buildings, I believe we're moving in the right direction in terms of making them more energy efficient and retrofitting them for the same.
And Mayor Walsh, ways to encourage efficient building?
Sure. So just to touch on the housing aspect, I'm really proud of the fact that we're not only both building new housing, we are retrofitting and we're putting millions of dollars of federal relief funds into improving homes. We have a great partner in Home Headquarters that's already, thanks to the partnership of the council, we've put that funding into Home Headquarters' hands, and it's going into people's homes right now. So we can and are doing both. Relative to our own buildings, I mentioned a few things earlier that I'll come back to. As a clean energy community, I talked about our Clean Fleets program. We also participated in the Solarize Syracuse campaign and adopted a solar unified solar permit to make it easier for people to put solar panels on their homes. We've continued to adopt LED lighting in our facilities, and that's saving us significant amounts of money and energy. And I mentioned the Property Assisted Clean Energy Program, or PACE program, which again is using our existing financial infrastructure through assessment to empower property owners to make energy improvements to their properties. So we're making a lot of progress and want to make a lot more.
And Ms. Berman?
You got it.
Oh, we started with you. I'm sorry. Sorry, I've lost track of that a couple of different times. So thank you so much on that. Last question I'm going to ask from the audience, and then we're kind of out of time. So let me just say this one is in the kind of fiscal sustainability as well as community sustainability area. How can you ensure that growth opportunities, business opportunities that result get created for small, minority, women-owned businesses, developers, and contractors? And Mayor Walsh, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's critical that that we do, and we are. I'm going to talk about the impact of the pandemic. Like so many other underlying equity issues in our community, the pandemic really exacerbated the problems that our minority-owned businesses face. And when we identified local funding to invest in our local businesses, we did so in an intentional way that prioritized minority-owned businesses, also women-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses. We were able to secure, before the federal government even began to move at the beginning of the pandemic, we had set aside $1.3 million from both the Syracuse Industrial Development Agency and the Syracuse Economic Development Corporation that we put out into the hands of our small business community, including a significant number of minority and women-owned businesses. So we need to continue to look for more opportunities to do that. But again, that's something that we've been very much focused on, and it's reflected in the investments we've made.
Ms. Berman?
Thank you. Chris, could you repeat the question?
I'm sure.
Thank you.
How can we ensure, or how could you ensure as mayor, that opportunities, business opportunities and development opportunities can be created or go to small minority and women-owned businesses, developers, and contractors?
Okay, I think we need to start by looking at how we cultivate minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses in our community. We have a number of incubator programs available, from the Tech Garden to the South Side Entrepreneurship, South Side, so whatever.
Innovation Center.
Innovation Center, yeah, thank you. That was started under my husband when he was Dean of the School of Management. And we have to, not only specify a percentage of contracts that go to these types of businesses, which the federal government often does. That's sort of the strings that are tied to many of these grants. But we have to encourage the growth and creation of new women and minority and veteran-owned businesses in our community.
Great. Mr. Bay?
Yes, I think a lot of this speaks to some of the things that I've mentioned before. When you talk about support for small business, specifically opportunities for minority business, minority-owned businesses, market understanding is key. I'll reiterate, I think it is a responsibility of government to assist in the effort of those who would do business to understand what their potential is to survive and to be encouraged in that respect. In addition, contract opportunity, increased contract opportunity. I talked to some contractors over the years, especially residential contractors. My logic when I would talk to home headquarters, Kerry Quaglia, and I was trying to get him to improve minority contracting, I said that we need to help them build capacity. And the statement I made was, if I overload you with contracts, you have to hire somebody in order to do the work. And so it has a real effect even for our shortness in labor. The other thing I'll add, and I know my time is running out, Bob, so I'm gonna be heard as fast as I can. Credit to this administration. I had pushed for, when we were looking at doing loans for small businesses, I pushed for a very low percentage of 1.5% APR. Fortunately, this administration saw the value in that, but low interest loans short term for businesses to be able, especially construction businesses, to cover the upfront costs, to put them in a position where they can actually perform and maintain their business.
Well, great. We've run out of time. I really want to thank you for all the broad areas that we've gone into. Sustainability might have seemed like a narrow topic, but as we covered it, it obviously covered lots and lots of different things. And thank you for sharing all of your ideas. Republican, conservative, and Syracuse United candidate Janet Berman on the end, Mayor Ben Walsh running for re-election, independent and on the Independence Party line, and Democrat Khalid Bey running for mayor of Syracuse. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you for those watching and listening, both those here in the City Hall atrium as well as those on the live stream. Certainly, the value of democracy is only enhanced by people getting involved, learning about things, hearing from candidates. We hope this forum might help somebody learn more about a specific topic, go out and vote, encourage others to vote, stimulate conversations about anything that you've heard today. We also want to thank our sponsoring organizations for this debate, for doing the months of work that it takes to set up such a gathering. Focus Greater Syracuse. This happens to be a special month for Focus Greater Syracuse. They're co-hosting this debate and forum today, as well as in 3 weeks, they have an annual fundraiser, Wisdom Keeper event honoring Linda Brown Robinson, Van Robinson, and Merica Trier for their continuing support of the Syracuse community. That event is Thursday, October 28th. You can go to their website, focussyracuse.org, for more information. Cny Solidarity, which is a coalition of civic justice and democracy groups fighting for the rights of people of color, refugees, people with disabilities, LGBTQI community members, and others. Their next event happens Monday. It's called Replace and Refocus, Celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, 6 p.m. in Columbus Circle, which some are now calling Heritage Park. More information about that group and its work is at cnysolidarity.org. And of course, Greening USA. If you'd like to continue the conversation about a sustainable future for Syracuse, please join Greening USA for their next Green Bag Lunch that takes place Friday, November 12th at noon. They'll be discussing Blueprint 15, which you heard some about in today's forum, working to create an environment where individuals and families, especially children, thrive and have genuine hope for successful futures and expectations that they'll make important contributions to the world around them. You can go to Greening USA's Facebook page for more information from that. And I want to thank you from WAER. I'm Chris Bolts, WAER's News and Public Affairs Director. WAER will be airing a condensed version of this forum Tuesday night at 7 p.m. If you're interested in listening, we'll also post all of the audio for the forum on our website on demand. Greening USA's YouTube page will also have the forum for someone who hasn't seen it or didn't see all of it or wants to see it again, or if you want to share it with somebody. So again, thanks to the candidates, thanks to the audience, you know, I hope you learned something and we'll go out and vote and act on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.